If you watch TV and you have HBO or watch HBO shows, then you've heard of stuff like Game of Thrones and The Wire or The Sopranos. But there's not a show out there that is like this one. This is So what makes this show so great? There are 5 things, in my opinion, one of which involves the other 4 completely, and these are consistency, storytelling, characters, tone, and themes. And we're going to start off by talking about the consistency, and that is in relation to all 4 of the other things that make this show great. So, the characters. These are very consistent characters. You got Barry, Sally, Gene Cousineau, Fuchs, and NoHo Hank. These 5 characters are the ones that get most of the spotlight compared to any of the other characters. Barry, of course, is the main character, played by Bill Hader. You got Sally, Gene, and the others, as I mentioned. But all of these characters are characters that grow, but stay who they are. And that is a theme across the entire show, is who are you? What are you? What makes you you? And these characters stay themselves, but they also go through very long-term character arcs. And Barry is the biggest example of this in the show because he's the main character. And he has the biggest dichotomy between what he wants to be versus what he actually is. And Barry, along with the other 4 characters that I mentioned, all have to make pretty tough choices throughout the entire show, but every time they make one, it might seem surprising at first, but when you think about it, it's who they are. It's consistent because they change throughout each season, each episode they change, and they have to make tough decisions, but they stay true to themselves despite their growth. I will talk more about each of these characters later on, but this show is also consistent through each season overall in terms of storytelling, because the tension never drops. There is some sort of tense big moment every single episode, and these are all of the events that are important to the theme and to the characters. And these tensions rise every season because the stakes rise. Every season there is something bigger at play. There is somebody in danger, somebody that is on the cusp of becoming who they want to be, and it just keeps going and going and going, and so does the tension because of the stakes. And that's because this show's not afraid to take risks, because there are a lot of them every season, and there are 3 seasons so far, and the show's not even done yet, so that is just only good news to me because we've already taken such big risks. The stakes keep going up. The tension just never loosens, and we keep going up, and I don't know where we're going, but either way, I think I'm gonna love it. One other big thing in terms of consistency in this show is that it subverts your expectations every single time without breaking immersion. There are common tropes throughout the show, at least at face value when you first meet these characters, but after only a couple of scenes, they show their depth very quickly, and these sort of tropey characters, these stereotypes, they become much more complex very quickly, and then you forget all about those tropes. Because by the end, they are so far removed from how they were perceived at first that they feel so deep, they feel real. And that is part of what makes the show so good, is that you have these characters that you care about because they feel like real people. The tone also is kept consistent throughout the entire show, as well as the themes, but I'll talk about more of those later on in the video. But now, let's jump to the storytelling. The plot of the show in general is that Barry is a hitman trying to be an actor. This is the setup for the first episode, and it is the big overarching concept throughout the rest of the show, at least so far. The show is a slow burn at first, but there are moments every episode that have bigger impacts on the story as you go along. And so you get this idea of where we're going with these slow moments. But once we get to where these moments are leading, you don't actually know what will happen once we get there. And it's always surprising, but it is always fitting. And like I said, it's because of the characters, because every choice they make fits who they are, even though at first it might be kind of surprising. One of the other big things about this show's storytelling is that everything has consequences, big or small. And characters have to make tough choices every single episode, like I said earlier. And things don't happen to the characters, they happen because of the characters, because the character said one thing or they did one thing, and now later on down the line, or maybe right afterwards, something happens because of what they said or did. And that is a big part of why this show is good. It's because these events aren't being forced onto the characters. It's the characters themselves that are driving this plot forward. One last thing about storytelling in this show is that things people say and do aren't forgotten. Big events that happen in the first season carry on throughout the third season, and even are the reasons why those things are happening in the third season. This is not one of those shows where in the first season you kill somebody, and then in season 3 that character that he killed hasn't been mentioned since that first season or since the second season if it happened at the finale of the first. Every choice carries a larger impact, a rolling impact that keeps building steam, and nothing is forgotten. No choice is forgotten by the plot or by the characters. Growth of the characters. So, as I said, there are 5 sort of bigger characters in this show. There's Barry, Sally, Mr. Kusino, Fuchs, and NoHo Hank. Barry is the main character, and throughout the show he has this bigger battle, this constant battle within himself that is about trying to change who he is and trying to reconcile with what he has done in his past and what he keeps on doing as a hitman. And he also has to navigate this complex father-son kind of dichotomy with Fuchs that is very complex, and there's some past stuff, some current stuff that keeps boiling over time and time again, but also it keeps coming back down to this area where it's like you don't know if they love each other, if they hate each other, if one's being used and one's the user. You don't really know because it's that complex, but you keep getting these hints and details as the show moves along that tell you where it might be heading, but it's hard to navigate for the viewer and for Barry, and that's a good thing. Barry also has to try and reestablish what right and wrong mean to him, because if you're a hitman, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but if you're a hitman trying to become an actor and leave the hitman life behind, you obviously have some kind of sense of right and wrong, but it's probably pretty skewed. So Barry has to wrestle with that throughout the entire show and figure out what right and wrong mean to him. And then there's Sally, who is Barry's love interest in the show, and one of the character growth moments or arcs for her is trying to overcome some past trauma. I won't say what it is, but she has to overcome this past trauma and also use it to be better. And that is also one of the bigger themes across several characters, is using trauma to grow and better yourself as a person. One of Sally's arcs as well is to realize her acting potential and also seize that potential once it's realized, because what's the point of having potential if you can't seize it? Then you have Mr. Kusno, who is my favorite character in the show. And one of the things that he has to deal with is being a real teacher to the students because he's the acting teacher, versus being the greedy person that we are told he is, and that we are shown he is in several moments in especially the first season. There's also him being a true mentor to Barry versus being a true father to his son, who is in the same age range as Barry himself. So Kusno has a past, as all characters do, and he's trying to navigate how to be a real father to his son, but also be a same kind of figure towards Barry, who has just joined the acting class. And because of the mistakes of Kusuno's past, he also has to try and overcome it and make up for his past mistakes. And that is one of the bigger character arcs for Kusuno in this show. But again, the way things turn out, it's surprising, but also it really works well because you never know what will actually happen with these characters and what they'll do. Then we have Fuchs, Monroe Fuchs, who is the handler for Barry as the hitman. And there is this complex thing between Barry, which is like love versus hate. You get a lot of tension between these two because their past is so complicated and it's so interwoven with who each of them are, and they both want different things from each other. So you have moments where they are getting into fights, but also where they have these really deep emotional moments. And this is a key thing when you're dealing with this kind of complex relationship where one person is a father figure and one is sort of a son to the other. Fuchs also deals with how he treats Barry in terms of, is Barry useful to him, but does he care more about Barry than he actually thinks, where he gets this jealousy of somebody else in their relation to Barry? Because this is a big part of the show, is this connection between Barry and Fuchs, as well as their past together and why it keeps them connected for so long. Finally, we have NoHo Hank, who is more of a comedic relief type of character, but the friendship that he develops with Barry is key to his character and Barry's, because this is all about trust, and it's about what happens if you build up this fragile trust between two opposite people, and what happens if one person breaks it and you keep going back. It's kind of like with Fuchs, but more so as a funny friend rather than this overbearing father figure. Hank also is a fan favorite because he is so unapologetically himself. He never strays from being who he is and who he wants to be, and he knows 100% who that person is. So overall, these 5 characters have season by season arcs, but also overall arcs that aren't yet complete in the show, because as I said, there's still a 4th season on the way, and it's slow, it's methodical, but that's just how it should be for a show like this. So now we'll talk about the tone of the show, and there are 2 tones that are working so well together here, and it's a comedic / lighthearted tone and a dark and serious tone. And the comedic stuff is mostly focused around the acting class and the Kusuno scenes within the acting class, but you get these small moments of real darkness, especially with Barry and Sally during their acting scenes, because they're pulling from darker things that have happened to them in the show or in their past. And it's a really good thing because the same thing happens on the opposite spectrum with the dark side of things when Barry is being this character of the hitman. And when we get these scenes, this part of the show is much more dark, much more serious, where he's doing hitman stuff, he's dealing with Fuchs, but also this part is also interrupted by comedic moments. And it's just like the acting class, but flipped, where we get these small moments of really funny dialogue or really funny pauses where you're not sure if what that person said or did was in seriousness or not. And the cutting and the editing of the show makes it really funny, but they also know when to pull their punches. They know when to stick to a tone and when to mix things up, and that's why in the most serious moments of the show, there is no comedy. And it's perfect because the show knows when to stick to something. It knows when to stay on one scene for longer or to cut it short. And that really helps with how these 2 tones mix and mesh well together, whether with more comedy and less drama or more drama and less comedy. Finally, I want to talk about this show's themes. And the central theme in this show is changing who you are, and more specifically, how much you want to change versus how much you can actually change. And one great thing about the show is that it does not give you a definitive answer, and I would rather have that than have them read us a script where it is a clear answer that the writers think is the truth. Because this show, it is close to real life in this sense, where there is no clear answer for everything, especially for changing who you are as a person. Because who you are is who you are, and it's insanely tough to change your habits and to change your actions, especially quickly. And that's why this show has this slow and methodical feel to it, because change is slow, especially in a person that is trying to change it by themselves. They do not have any help, and they're trying to navigate their own life and their own actions, and there is no answer that the show wants to give you, at least not yet. But there are hints both ways as to where Barry, the main character, is headed, because he wants to no longer be this hitman. He wants to be this actor, this nice, soft guy who's nice, but the hitman side of him is angry and vicious, and he still is having problems trying to figure out how much he can change, because maybe there's a cap on how much you can change. This theme also works so well because the show is taking us on this extended, long journey about these characters finding their own answers to this question of, who am I and can I change? And each character has ups and downs where they feel like, oh yes, I have changed, but then they bring them back down to reality, and it's like, not so fast, because it is a commitment. It's a long-term journey, and it's about the verbal commitment and the mental commitment to be better versus the actions that directly challenge that. And it's also about temporary change versus permanent change, because these are two very different things. You can change your actions and your words for, say, a couple of days or a week, but eventually you will probably slip back into being who you were before, because that's who you are. So that was a lot, but hopefully you get what I'm talking about here, and you get why you should watch Barry. Thanks for watching.